And our evolution means that we can have the responsibility to bring healing to others. So that our evolution, the efforts that we make, can really open up and unlock like great depths of hopefully compassion, empathy for all of humanity. And then we can bring that to really uplift others.
Do you want to wake up feeling like you're stepping into who you're meant to be, into the best possible version of you? What if I told you that the key to your best life, health, and happiness are all around you? You just have to find what works for you. I'm Hopeful Jasa, and I believe that there isn't just one way to live a healthy and meaningful life, and that all you need is a little inspiration to make changes that last from the inside out. Each week, I'll be sharing tangible tips and inspirational interviews to help you on your journey. These are the steps to take to improve your life and live with purpose. This is Hopeful and Wholesome. Hey y'all, welcome back to Hopeful and Wholesome. Today I have on the show Carolyn Wallace. Carolyn is a psychotherapist and a spiritual director and archetypal consultant with almost 20 years of experience guiding people through the process of transformation. She's worked with various modalities. Archetypal consulting is the most powerful and transformative so far, and that's what we're going to dive into in this episode. If you don't know what archetypal consultant is or what an archetype is, she is going to really dissect what all of that is, what an archetype is, how it shows up in our own lives, how we can kind of recognize it in other people and really get a better perspective of where they're coming from, and how to use archetypes to notice when we're living in fear, survival, or self-sabotage, and how we can really embody kind of the light side of these archetypes so we can really make progress in our lives. This is really, really insightful, inspiring conversation and really, really enlightening. So let's jump in. All right, y'all, let's jump in. I'm here with Carolyn, and we are bringing a conversation about archetypes today, which is, like I told Carolyn before we hit record, this is something we haven't talked about yet. So I'm excited to bring kind of a new conversation around self-sabotage and just embodiment. So this is awesome. Thanks so much for joining us today, Carolyn.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. So I think before I ask that, I was going to start with kind of the basics, but can you just explain, just to give an explanation of what you do as a psychotherapist and as an archetypal consultant, what that means?
Sure. So I am a psychotherapist, which basically means I support people who come to me who need therapy. But then the archetypal consulting comes from, recently, I guess just January of this year, I got certified through Carolyn Wallace's program, through her program called Sacred Contracts. So that's where my certification comes from. That's where really all of my education about archetypes comes from. And what an archetypal consultant does is supports people to identify the archetypes that are active in their own personal lives, and then to try to figure out how these archetypes are getting in their way, most likely, because that's what happens as ourselves as humans. We get in our own ways all the time. Mm-hmm. And so how to look at where we're getting in our way, using the archetypes to help us really become conscious of the patterns. And then say, okay, well, what Carolyn Wallace teaches is that there's different levels of consciousness. So if I'm in a really reactionary level of consciousness, just suppose you mentioned self-sabotage. So suppose I'm like self-sabotaging all over the place. That's like at a lower level of consciousness. But we can look at the saboteur archetype and look at how it evolves. And we can say, okay, I'm tired of being at this lower level of consciousness. Why don't I make a choice that brings me a little bit more power? It takes me out of my pattern that doesn't serve me. And how can I evolve this archetype in my life so that I'm expressing a lighter side of it rather than the shadow side? And when we start to do this, we do this with one archetype. We can do it with all of our archetypes. We can just come into a place of just owning so much more of our power and consciously creating our lives in ways that we might have not really realized we had the power to do.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Can you, and you alluded to it there, but can you explain in the most simple terms what an archetype is for people who are like, I don't even know what you're talking about?
Okay, so what Carolyn Wallace identifies archetypes as, they're just patterns of power that exist in the collective unconscious. And my understanding is that they got here through hundreds and thousands of years of human beings occupying the planet and behaving and acting, and they kind of crystallized into these patterns. And we can't escape them. They kind of run our lives, whether we're aware of them or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What do you find are some of the most common that show up for the people that you work with?
Well, Carolyn describes 4 survivor archetypes. And what in her program, she teaches that these 4 survivor archetypes are universal to every person on the planet. So those 4, we call them the victim, the child, the saboteur, and the prostitute. So those 4 we've all got. And then 8 others, we all come in with 12 is the program. And the remaining 8 are different for each of us. I mean, some people will share like maybe the artist archetype or the healer archetype, but really your 12 is going to be very individual to you.
Okay. So those 4 you mentioned, those are ones everybody has all 4 of those that show up. Yeah. Okay. So I guess, can you, and you don't have to go into great detail, but those 4 that we all have, can you just kind of speak to each of those so we know what those are?
Yep. The victim archetype. And remember, when I use these words, the word victim, for example, we think of someone who's disempowered. And so the victim archetype actually, well, they all do, all of these 4 and all the archetypes actually have this trajectory of going from shadow to light to this beautiful grounded essence. So when I say victim, we all have the victim, we've all been there, right? But we all have the capacity to evolve it to something much more beautiful and amazing than just victim shadow. So I just want to put that out there. So the victim says, oh, I'm not allowed to have this thing. I'm so sad. Life is oppressing me in some way. Right. And then the saboteur is when we have a goal of whatever it might be, going to college or getting a healthy eating regimen going or whatever it is. It's all the ways that when we're just about to start doing this new thing, all the reasons why maybe it's really not such a good idea. Like, I really want to sleep late, or I really want to like eat this pizza or whatever it is. And then the child archetype is, I think it's a constellation of the rest of them, but it's when we feel like we don't know how to do something, so therefore we can't, or we're very dependent on someone to do something for us. It depends on the type, but there's different types of child archetypes too. When we feel lonely and abandoned, that would be more of the orphan child archetype. And again, all of these have their trajectory from shadow to light. We can have so much compassion when we're in the shadows of these, and then we like have a job to do to evolve them. And then the last one, I forget all the ones I said, the prostitute, that archetype is the one where we kind of sell ourselves out for security in some ways. Like when we've stayed in a job way too long, or we stay in a job that doesn't align with our values, because we really are going to miss that paycheck if we leave. When we stay in a relationship way too long, because either for financial reasons or we don't want to hurt the person's feelings, that kind of a thing. That's when the prostitute and the shadow is showing up. So, and that also has this beautiful trajectory, and we can evolve all of these and just walk around with more confidence and faith in ourselves and sovereignty about our lives if we really choose to work with these.
Yeah. And so when we all have all of those that are present, and then we have others that you say are individual. So what do you suggest for people? I've asked this question before in talking with different types of therapists, because it's always interesting to me, the perspective on how we can identify them, like how we recognize them, right? I mean, because there's an awareness piece for us to be able, like you're talking about, the embody the light side, which I want to ask about later. But how do we even recognize that these are showing up and that we need to kind of shift our perspective?
I'm not sure exactly how to answer that. Well, when these archetypes show up, everyone kind of can see them. Everyone recognizes them. So if, have you ever been in the presence of someone who is just this beautiful artist and just can't stop making art? Well, there's an artist archetype, or a healer, or someone who walks into burning building, I would say that's a rescuer, like a firefighter going into a burning building. That's a rescuer. And these people can't help but do what they do.
It's what they're naturally drawn to do. Yeah.
Your child, you can't help but have a garden or be someone who is a scuba diver and studies the depths of the oceans and marvels in the plant life, or however a nature child would show up, the forests or whatever. Right. So it's, you kind of can't help yourself but to love these things. And they really resonate.
That makes sense. Well, and that can answer my next question, is I think the four that you mentioned that we all have, a lot of people might, label those as negative, right? But not all the archetypes are negative. It's more just kind of what our soul is naturally attracted to and naturally drawn to, and kind of living out that kind of purpose piece, I guess.
Well, they all have their shadow sides. I mean, so negative or like, for example, the victim archetype, according to Carolyn Mace, that starts off maybe in the shadow, but then it has this beautiful trajectory of going through, like, gaining some warrior energy. So what if you were victimized by something happening in your life and you didn't feel like you had any power around it? But then you started bringing in some warrior energy, and the warriors kind of says, I will not allow this situation to continue. I'm going to I'm going to stand tall. I'm going to put out my hands in front of me and really protect myself and have some boundaries. You have to learn some good boundaries. That's more of a warrior archetype. And then to continue that trajectory, you become ultimately, in the highest level of consciousness, the guardian of self-esteem. And the guardian of self-esteem is like the victim in the full light, where you can protect yourself, have good, strong boundaries, know that you can keep yourself safe, know that you can stay boundaries, and know that you can do it without hurting someone else. Boundaries doesn't mean, fighting. It's more of a compassionate warrior. So can you look back at your actions and feel good about how you've behaved, both for yourself and on behalf of someone else, the other person, whatever is like the oppressing thing.
Right. So how do we get to that part, this kind of light side that you're talking about? What does that process look like in order for us to kind of get to the light side, like to get kind of through that shadow part?
Well, the first thing would be just being aware that you're in a pattern in the first place. I mean, that would be so that's why archetypes are so helpful. I mean, there's lots and lots of spiritual systems, different systems that all talk about the same thing. But archetypes is one way to say, oh, look, I really behaved like a bully today. I really bullied that person who got my order wrong, when I was in the fast food restaurant, and maybe I don't want to do that anymore. Maybe that's not such a good way to be. So because we have language around what that archetype looks like, that lets us say, okay, well, what would a bully in the light look like? And if you do some research and look up the bully archetype, you'd find that someone would still have that archetype. It's not that they wouldn't get rid of it. They still have it, but maybe they become someone who motivates someone else, someone who can be one of those people that really lights a fire under someone like a coach, but does it without taking away anything from someone else, and does it with the person's full consent. And then you've got that motivating force without the destructive side of it.
So that was kind of my next question. So with these archetypes, is this something that you're born with and you live your life with these? Do they change? Do you get rid of them? How does that work?
Well, that's a good question. It depends how you look at it. I think, we are born with this. Like Carolyn Mace's book is called Sacred Contracts, because what she writes is that we make a contract before we incarnate.
Soul contract.
We're gonna carry these archetypes with us throughout our lives. Right. But just suppose I was going to read someone's archetypal wheel for them when they're 25. And then I read it again when they're 45 or 50. They may have different archetypes that they're just more clear about. I think maturity happens, and you may be able to claim a more mature version of an archetype that wasn't quite developed when you were a young person. So yeah, I do think, you can switch them out.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. That makes sense. And I can see, well, and I think to your point too, what you were saying before, just I guess it depends how you look at it. Like you talking about the victim and kind of the light side of the victim, which I guess you might consider a different archetype, or it could just be kind of like a transformation
Depends
of
how
that
you
same archetype. Yeah. Yeah. So that makes total sense. That makes total sense. So then when we're kind of on this personal, I'm trying to think of the word to use, I guess, personal journey, or this, your own personal journey, I guess. What are some ways that we can recognize how these archetypes show up in other people? I'm thinking of just like in a relationship, like with your partner, or your spouse or something, or your kids or people you work with. But how do you recognize these so that we can really kind of come at things with a new perspective? Because I love this in human design. I love human design. And I love how this really changes how you see people, right? When you understand other people's human design, and like, for my kids, for example, like when I finally learned about my kids, it's like, well, you approach the relationship in a different way because you understand them at a different level. So I imagine this is kind of a similar thing where you can really have a different perspective of how you interact with that person in that relationship when you understand their archetypes.
Well, especially if they've identified their archetypes, I think that's especially helpful. If they haven't done it, then we're kind of just guessing, and there may not be a lot of integrity of just guessing what someone's archetypes are.
Right.
But like I had, I used this example in my workshop. I worked with a man as one of my clients, and he bought a piece of property with his wife or his partner, whatever it was. And they were thinking that on this property, they were going to just have like a couple of chickens and a couple of dogs. And then this partner just started like adding more and more animals, like started adding like, all of a sudden they had 24 chickens, and then there was a donkey, and then there were a couple of goats. And then he was like, wait a minute, I never signed up to live on a farm. But when we started talking about the nature child, which we talked about before, a nature child, their relationship to nature and whatever way it shows up for them is almost just as important as the relationship to people. And so with that lens, with that perspective, he was able to have a little more compassion for what was driving her. But also she had to be aware of that lens too, because you can't like override, if you're in a partnership with someone, you need to also be considerate of what they're wanting.
Totally.
It's like, okay, I got to check my nature child just a little bit to accommodate the person in my life.
A little bit of compromise, maybe not all the animals.
But without recognizing it.
Yeah.
I could have run rampant, or who
totally.
knows?
And that would have been, or like a make or break thing in the relationship. Like, wait a minute, I didn't sign up for this. Yeah.
Right,
yeah.
exactly.
That makes total sense. That makes total sense. So how do you, I guess, can you explain the process of working with someone like you, of course, but the process of understanding what your archetypes are, what that looks like?
I think you would just have to sit in front of a long list of archetypes, and I could send people a link if they come work with me. There are links. I mean, you can just even look on the internet, just Google like list of archetypes. I think archetypes.com has a lot of lists. Carolyn Mace's book Sacred Contract, but in the back in the index, just pages and pages of different archetypes to choose from. So what I would recommend is find some resource and read through them and kind of make notes, the ones that really hit you, the ones like the bully, like you got to be really honest with yourself, like out the ones that really say, oh, that's me. That's been me since I was a child. That's and, you can sort of start to gather your list together.
Yeah. So for those listening who are going to take on that journey of kind of discovering their archetypes, do you have any like top tips or whatever that you would give people for, I guess, really working with those, like what that looks like? And like you're saying, like being really honest with yourself, like that's a big piece. But I imagine that for some people who maybe have a hard time being honest with themselves, like they might miss pieces, right? So I guess you have tips to really accurately identify your archetypes, and then just being able to work with them. And because I also feel like there's this piece of being able to work with them without judgment, right? Because I think can be a hard thing, right? So I guess, what are your top tips for kind of approaching that?
Well, I think self-awareness is important. I mean, if someone's not self-aware, it's not like I'm going to be able to say, oh, you really don't have the healer archetype. You actually have the vampire archetype instead. Like that's really not for me to decide. I would want people to come with enough self-awareness to be able to pick out a list of 12 archetypes from wherever resource they decide to look.
Right.
Yeah. And so the other thing is what you said before about not having shame around archetypes. There's some archetypes like the victim, for example, which I know really well personally. There's no shame in having an archetype, because remember that they can all evolve.
Right.
Like, what if you knew someone, a beloved person in your life, who had the addict archetype? There's no, that's a hard archetype to have, but there's no shame in having the addict archetype. And what you want to do is be clear about how the addict archetype can evolve. How that person can evolve that archetype is the level of self-awareness and keeping themselves like on the straight and narrow path, and just that dedication and commitment that they would have to have, so that respect and discipline for themselves that then can, along with the humility, because anyone with the addict archetype knows that like one step backwards means they're right back in the shadow again. And, one step to the other side means that they can be a wonderful, wise resource for others, compassionate, wise resource for others, but always towing that line of humility, remembering where they came from, honoring and supporting people who haven't quite gotten there yet. So that's how we can kind of make the things that we may feel shame about in our lives, how we can really turn them into our greatest assets.
Totally. Yeah, totally. Well, and it's the saying, like, make your mess your message. It's like that, kind of on the same line as that. And I think it's, even if you don't believe in soul contracts, if you don't believe in that or whatever, I do think that we can all agree that every human on the planet has a certain purpose and path, right? We're just all part of a puzzle piece. We all have a piece to play. And so I think that's a really powerful piece to understand your archetype, to be able to kind of know what role you're here to play, because you're here to kind of, learn these lessons, and life and the universe and God, whoever it's going to teach us these lessons. But then it's also like what those lessons are here, how those lessons affect other people, like how we're supposed to help others with that. So I think,
and our evolution means that we can have the responsibility to bring healing to others.
Yes.
So that our evolution, the efforts that we make, can really open up and unlock like great depths of, hopefully, compassion, empathy for all of humanity. And then we can bring that to really uplift.
Yeah, totally. And I think a lot of times we miss that piece when, we're mentioning like the victim or the prostitute, or, those what you're mentioning at first, or the vampire, if people don't want the vampire archetype. But I think we forget, sometimes we get so focused on ourselves that we forget that while we do have our own personal journey, we're also here for the betterment of like the collective, right? Like we have a collective responsibility as well. And I think we forget that these things we might, you're saying feeling shame around or whatever, like the addict archetype, like, yeah, I mean, that's a tough one. But then imagine, I always think like, my mom used to say stuff like this, like, imagine how much faith God has in you, that he's given you this piece. And it's like, now you have this piece to be able to help other people. Like he felt you were strong enough to be able to uphold this particular archetype. And now you can use it. You have power in that.
Beautifully said. What responsibility do we have? We have a responsibility for evolving so that we stop hurting ourselves and other people. I mean, even if we don't mean to be hurting ourselves and other people, if I'm stuck in my saboteur, I'm stuck in my child archetype, that means I'm probably making a lot of people around me kind of crazy.
Right.
So what responsibility do we have to do the best we can? And then as we get better at it, then how can we I
love that. That's so good. So good. I love this conversation. I could talk about this stuff all day. This is so good. So I'm going to put, well, actually, I'll ask you this first. I do have another question. I want to ask you a question that I like to ask everyone as we wrap up. But can you just let everybody know where they can find out more about you and working with you, maybe doing some work with you as the archetype consultant that you are, and you in your psychotherapy work, where they can find out more?
Well, my website is yourradiantlife.net. And I have a Facebook page, which is Your Radiant Life with Carolyn Wallace. And I offer it's a 90-day program called Elevate Your Voice and Purpose. And in that program, what we'll do is we'll have you get really clear about what are your 12 archetypes. And then we'll cast them into an archetypal wheel, which is sort of the same. It's the same as the astrological wheel. And that's a creation that Carolyn Mace created for all of us to use. And it's also outlined in her book, Sacred Contracts. So if you wanted to just buy the book and start with that, you could. And then what happens is when we cast your wheel, we know which of your 12 archetypes fall in which house, which gives us so much information. Because, like, for example, what's in, like we talked before about the couple that was dealing with the nature child archetype, what's in your 7th house? What's the archetype there that is kind of dominating your relationship patterns? And to just have an awareness of that, to know that can be so helpful of a partner, to know theirs, how they work together, how they bounce off of one another, how they get each other's way. It's just really such a beautiful tool.
Yeah, I love that. That's awesome. So I'll put links to all that in the show notes. So you can go check that out and check out everything that Carolyn's doing. So the last question that I want to ask you, that I like to ask everybody, what do you think is the most important thing you can do to live with purpose?
The most important thing you can do to live with purpose is the places where you're stuck, the places where your life isn't going the way you would like it to be going, to really pay attention to those and to know that there's always some path forward, but that's going to be one of your deepest places of work and one of the most important places of work. And so to get the support you need around that, whether it's therapy, whether it's archetypal consultant, whether it's some other type of coaching or a meditation or some kind of religion, whatever helps you, a best friend, to say, wait a minute, I'm noticing this pattern in myself and I don't like it. What do I need to do? What's my next step? And to get the support you need.
I love that.
We need help.
Exactly. I was just about to say, I think it goes back to what we were saying before, like understanding we're all part of the collective and we're not meant to do it all by ourselves. I have to remind myself that too. A lot of times it's you, because I'm sure there's something archetype that is me, like, oh, I can do it myself. I can do it all myself, but we're not here to do it all by ourselves. So I love that.
Yes.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you so much, Carolyn. This is such a cool conversation. And I know people are going to be so intrigued and go check out everything you're doing and understand. I mean, this is just another one of those really incredible tools to help you on your own personal path and your own personal journey of understanding you and the role you're here to play and, your purpose and all of that. So I love that this is just such another cool tool. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Hopeful and Wholesome, y'all. If you found value in this week's episode, please subscribe on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcast and leave a review to let me know what you thought. I'd love to know what you find useful in these episodes so I can know how to provide the most value I can to my listeners. And if you have topics you'd like to know more about, I'd love to hear those as well. So shoot me a message on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn. It's @TheHopePedraza, or you can visit my website, hopefulandwholesome.com. Thanks, y'all.